Function of margin. In this section, we're going to talk about margin trading. Margin trading is really about the concept of, rather than buying the, let's say, shares in the full amount now, rather trading in derivative instruments that enable you to pay a small amount now in terms of premium, margin, etc., and still get exposure to the full value of the underlying shares or other contracts you're exposed to. So, in essence, there's actually three ways to margin trade. To pay a premium now in the terms of options, to pay initial margin now and lock into a future, or maybe even buy the shares but not in full and borrow the difference from a broker, for example. So let's look at each one and the implications of margin trading through buying of options to start off. First of all, remember, what is an option? It gives you the right but not the obligation to trade at a strike price on exercise date. Now, this suggests you pay a small amount in terms of a premium. Remember, the premium is a percentage value of the nominal value. So you pay a small amount. Now, if the market moves in your favor, you have the potential to make unlimited profits. If the market moves against you, well, because you have no obligations to transact, the worst that can happen is you lose the known premium that you've paid potentially upfront or over the life of the contract. This is a very specific profile of options, which limits your losses to the premiums paid. Now consider trading on margin, but using a futures contract. What is a futures contract? Establishing obligations to transact in the future and fixing with certainty the price of or the rate at which those obligations will exist. Now, you don't have to pay premiums for futures, but in order to transact, you do have to place margin on all exchange-traded contracts. Remember, this is still a marginal amount compared to the full value of the outstanding contract. So, now you have the ability to have a smaller capital outlay than you would if you bought all the shares up front. And if the price rises or goes in your favor, you still get the full benefit of that upswing without ever having bought the shares themselves. If the price drops, now, this is where it's very different to an option. If the price drops, well, you are obligated to still transact, and you could result in losing more than the margin you placed up front. What we're really talking about when trading on margin is gearing. The fact that you can put a small capital outlay and still get exposure. We've looked at how options limit the losses with a small initial premium outlay, and now we've considered how futures, still an initial outlay is smaller on a margin, but your losses, in fact, can be way in excess. This is gearing at its true. The last conversation around margin trading is to talk about the fact that rather than buy all the shares, say you're looking to buy 100 shares, you only buy 50 of them and borrow the remaining 50 from a stockbroker, for example. So you've reduced your initial capital outlay, and you still have essential ownership for the full 100, but through borrowings this time. Recall, if the market goes in your favor, you still have full exposure on the total 100 shares and could have unlimited profits. But if you've borrowed to buy and the share price goes against you, you still have obligations to repay that loan and interest, of course. And now, once again, your losses could result in way more than the initial 50, for example, that you paid for this full exposure. This is very similar to the obligations and the payoff profile that came about for entering into a futures contract as well. Try to explain the impacts of gearing or trading on margin through different instruments. I hope you found it interesting.